I just don't get the sense that we are fully possessed by the reality that water is a finite resource, land is a finite resource. Is the climate change debate? Have we closed it? Are we all agreed on whether it's something that we need to be doing something about? Having this view of the continent, the subcontinent, the sub-region, what are the major challenges that we're facing in this space? Greetings, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by the Nyaraza Group. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Dr. Yemi Katerere, a forester and environmentalist. Enjoy this truly informative conversation. Dr. Yemi Katerere, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Trevor, thank you so much for inviting me to join you in Conversation with Trevor. It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Yemi, doing my research on you, I was like, where am I going to start? You have been all over the place in terms of the field that you are in, across the world, across the globe. Struck by the fact that you've spent 30 years, you have 30 years experience in commercial forestry, research, development, policy-related stuff at NGO and state level. If I were to say to you, what have been the highlights of those 30 years in this great space that you are in?
I think I've been privileged, really, to be able to work with the state. And I think that working with the state brings a lot of advantages, because when you work in the environmental sector, the state is a key actor. But also, there's an interaction between the state as well as civil society organizations, communities, and so forth, in terms of their lives and their economies are directly dependent on nature. And so you can't avoid that. And often the relationship between nature and people is about policy, because that's what you're looking at. Because people impact nature, and nature also impacts their lives and livelihoods. So you begin to interact with the NGO community, local communities, the state, and of course the private sector is a key player in terms of many industries, as much as they may not realize that their businesses rely as well on biodiversity or natural resources. So whether you're talking about water, if you're brewing beer, you need water. And if those rivers dry up, your business is at risk. So in the private sector, you need to think, what are the risks of depleting nature and biodiversity? And one of the things that I've always felt, Trevor, is that if you're going to work in this sector, you also need to stay abreast of the research and the developments and the thinking and the debates that are taking place. And so one way of doing that is engaging with research, attending seminars, and publishing, because that's where you tend to stay abreast of the developments and what is going on. So yeah, I think I've worked in the NGO sector, I've worked in the state sector, I've been on private sector boards, I've been an international civil servant with the United Nations. So I've had an enriching career.
Enriching career in a space, Yemi, where this is big stuff. The environment, forestry, and you're dealing with civil society, you're dealing with governments, policy formulation. It's one of those places where you might be forgiven that nothing is actually happening, because as you drive around the streets of Harare or flying all over the world, there's a temptation to say, but is what we're doing making a difference? Does that ever cross your mind? Are we making a difference?
Well, let's say this. There are lots of people that are dedicated and committed to to ensuring that the state of the environment is resilient, that the integrity of our ecosystems, where we get a lot of services, where there's clean water, where there's soils for agriculture, that those things are taken care of. There are people's lives that are directly dependent, and if water disappears, their lives are impacted quite significantly. So there are people working on these issues. But the question is, are we winning the battle? We're losing a lot of biodiversity. We're losing a lot of forests. So clearly there's a challenge. And that if we continue at this rate, then we're going to reach a point where we cannot sustain the lifestyles that we're enjoying today. And so we've got to change. So one of the underlying things is the issue of change, that we have to embrace change. We can't just continue to live our lives as if everything is available for everybody at the quantities that they want, and to use the environment in any way and manner that they would like to do. So there has to be something that begins to to give. We have to live within the limits of nature, and if we go beyond that, then I think we start to feel the stress.
Are you getting the sense? I hear you, Yemi, saying there are people dedicated to that. I mean, let's take, for instance, our Zimbabwean environment. Do you get the sense that, one, we do appreciate the fact that there's a limit to which we can use the natural environment that we have, water, the way we treat soil, are we respectful, and so forth? Do you get the sense that we are respectful of what we've been given by nature, by God? Have we gotten to that space?
It depends where you are.
Yeah.
If you go to the local level, clearly those people understand more than anybody else what it means to respect nature, to use nature in a particular way, because they know that when that nature is gone, so it might be something as simple as energy. So if you are dependent on biomass, wood for cooking, and there's no wood, you start to walk longer distances. Water, the same thing. You start to walk longer distances, to fetch water. Same thing with soil productivity. If you are cropping and you're trying to grow some maize or groundnuts, whatever the case might be, as the soils deplete, you begin to see that your harvests are also, depleting. So at that level, those people fully understand that. And sometimes we're not learning enough from these people that understand this relationship. And even in the city, we might think that we have no connection with nature, but we do. So if you think about it, where does our food come? You and I go to the supermarket and we buy it. But where is that
coming from?
Where is that coming from? And it's being produced somewhere, and it's being produced often in a rural setting, on a farm, or in the communal areas. So sometimes we don't make that connection. Or when we turn the water tap on, we don't think where that water is coming from until it stops coming out. And then we begin to wonder, what is going on. So I think maybe we need to work more on the education, for people to be more aware of the centrality of nature to our lives and our economies. And that, when we talk about economic growth, and we talk about GDP and those kinds of issues, and sometimes we can pursue growth for the sake of growth, and we can say we are growing at 10%. Well, what does it mean in reality?
What's the cost of that growth?
Exactly. Look at tobacco.
Yeah.
It's a golden leaf. But if we look at the cost, we have a large number of outgrower farmers. These are small-scale producers that are growing tobacco under contract. They rely on cutting indigenous woodland in order to cure the tobacco. But we don't factor that cost. But one day we'll wake up and we don't have any woodland left. But we say we are earning $1 billion a year from tobacco. But what's the cost? And I think that is one thing that we need to really start to think about. So even at the policy making level, so they've started here, they've introduced a tobacco levy, and the money from that tobacco levy is supposed to go towards. Yeah, well, and they're growing, they're doing wood loss, but there are so many issues around that. Is it the right thing to be growing eucalyptus? It's an introduced species. It uses a lot of water. Are we growing this eucalyptus species in the right areas? Or are we just introducing it wherever there's land without thinking through what are the consequences, what are the implications on groundwater supplies, and so on and so on. So I think those are the kinds of things. So it's a very there's no kind of simple, straight, response to these issues, because they are complex.
They are complex. They involve lots of stakeholders. I must say, before we move on, Yemi, that for me, take this as a pedestrian view, and the pedestrian view on my side is, I just don't get the sense that we are fully possessed by the reality that water is a finite resource, land is a finite resource. We don't make the connection between the output of tobacco, as we are talking, and what that is, the impact that it is having on nature. I don't see the priority that either civil society, the government, and the private sector and the citizens are placing on the importance of that balance. Am I completely way off, or you'd share some of my concerns?
No, I would share some of your concerns, and that there might be some people that get it, but I think that by and large, people are preoccupied with today's existence. Where do I get, my next meal? Where do I get some money? And those kinds of issues. And they're not thinking about the longer term. So someone else needs to think about that longer term. And that's partly, the role of the state. And I think also researchers. We need to be looking at those issues, and we need to be writing about those issues. We need to be communicating about the longer term consequences and implications of the decisions that we are taking today. So the short-termism is there, and I think for many people, that's their reality. I need water today. I need wood today to cook, my meal. And so wherever I get it, I'm going to get it. And so I think when we start to talk about more inclusive growth, how do we address the issues of poverty? How do we address the issues of inequity? And I think that as long as we continue to pursue growth for the sake of growth, then I think these challenges will always be there. So I think that for me is the biggest issue. How do we tackle the issue of getting growth that is more inclusive? We don't leave people behind, and we can begin to tackle some of these issues. So I think coming into the Forestry Commission, it was a parastatal. But it was a parastatal that had the hallmark of a department, a government department. The logo was a map of Zimbabwe with an indigenous tree in the middle. It didn't inspire, excitement about this organization. And historically, it's been established to support the private sector. So if we look at some of the activities or the commercial plantations, you grow the trees, you do research, and the benefits by and large were accruing to the private sector. So the first thing that we did was to try to rethink that just growing trees is not a very profitable thing, and the rate of return is not so great. We might as well grow crops, we'll make more money. And if you're going to make money and make a difference at the national level, then we need to get closer to the customer. So we need to value add. So we grow a tree, we value add and get as close to the customer as is possible. So that became one of the first things that I thought we needed to do, is we need to change our business model.
Right.
But also rebrand. So we rebranded the Forestry Commission. We did a new logo, and we had a jingle looking beyond the trees. That, our existence within this economy was not just about, trees. But it was about trees and people, but also about the economy. So we rebranded, we came up with a new business model. We started to add manufacturing into our business model. And I'll tell you an interesting story. One of the things we did was to introduce roof truss manufacturing. We bought a property from Dairy Board in Masasa, and we imported a roof truss manufacturing plant, which is still running today. And I was called by one of the biggest retail outlets, you know, hardware and so forth. And they said, look, Yemi, this doesn't make sense. There is no space for you in this market. You should let us take over this roof truss plant. I said, look, let the customer decide. If there are too many of us, someone is going to go under. You know, people are looking for service.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're all producing roof trusses, there's got to be something that differentiates us. It can be price, it can be quality. That thing is still running today.
What's the name of it?
It's now under Allied Timbers because you know the split. So essentially, the Forestry Commission had is a very interesting model. It had the commercial forestry plantations, which was in the Eastern Highlands, which is growing pines, and also on the way to Masvingo, Mteyo Forest Reserve, which was doing poles, electricity poles, fence posts, mine props, and those kinds of issues. And then we also had social responsibility. So we are the only research organization in the country in forestry. So we had a research division, and we were doing extension work, working with communities as well. And we were the largest sport hunting organization in the country. We were unrivaled in terms of that. So what happened is there was always a tension. You know, you cannot be a commercial entity, but at the same time be a regulator. And so there was always this tension.
Player and referee, basically.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so there was always noise that this isn't, you know, the playing field is not level. And so this is why we went for the separation, the commercial activities to become a company.
Allied Timbers.
Allied Timbers. So the roof truss plant is still running under
Allied Timbers.
Under Allied.
Okay. And was there an attempt to try and list Allied Timbers, or it's running as almost you know, a separate entity that resembles what was a department of the Forest Commission?
It's still running as a separate entity, and there were some attempts, but they never actually went through. And my sense is that probably you want a partial privatization as opposed to a full, you know, privatization, and the state to continue to have a stake. But you know, if I look at the sport hunting, for example, which was in Matabeleland,
is that still happening? The sport
still
hunting?
happening, but you know, we read the situation then that sport hunting is going to come under a lot of pressure. There are going to be lobby groups that are going to lobby against sport hunting. And so we started to say, right, let's introduce a new product. And so we introduced photographic safaris. So we built a lodge near Safari Lodge, near Hwange National Park. We built another lodge near the Vic Falls Airport. And then we had a lodge on Lake Kariba near Binga. So we said these three lodges will form a triangle for photographic safaris. So big game, the Victoria Falls, one of the 7 wonders. And then experience in the lake. So you can do game viewing from the lake, you can do activities on the lake and so on. So we introduced that as well because we felt that sport hunting in the long run would be under threat. And so we needed to anticipate and prepare for that.
Tell me, in terms of forestry extension, is any of that still taking place as far as the Forestry Commission is concerned?
Yes, so Forestry Commission remains and retained the name Forestry Commission and the branding that we had developed. And then Allied Timbers developed a new branding for the company. So they still exist.
Right.
But from what I understand, serious challenges of funding, so grossly underfunded. So that's the major.
During your time, was the Forest Commission sustainable? Was it profitable, or it survived based on a stipend from the taxman?
Both. So our position was, you as the state, you're asking us to do something.
Okay.
And we are acting as a consultant. If you want us to do social forestry, extension forestry, you need to pay for it. If you give us $5, we'll do $5 of extension. If you give us $1 million, we'll do $1 million of extension. So that was our argument. But what we would do, for example, in the western part of the country where we were doing hunting, we would say the profits from hunting will go back into the management of those forests in the western part of the country. So we would put back into those forests the profits. in order to sustain. Because we said the biodiversity in those forests is not just woody biomass, but it's also living, animal biomass, and that we can make money from both. And so we need to invest in that. So we used to invest in that. But for the social forestry and extension, we were getting state funding as well as donor money as well to do some of that work.
When you look at, let me maybe ask you a heavy lifting question. Is the climate change debate, have we closed it? Are we all agreed on whether it's something that we need to be doing something about? The big climate change debate. I mean, there was a meeting in Glasgow, COP20, is it COP26? There's COP27 in Egypt. Do you get a sense that we are coming around to drawing the line in the sand and moving forward to address the issue?
I think there's no question about it, that the two emergencies we face in the world are climate change and biodiversity. You can't address one without the other. We can't talk about addressing climate change without addressing the biodiversity emergency and vice versa. Similarly, if we look at the food production system, it also impacts on climate change, and it is also impacted by climate change. So in some ways, those are the three huge challenges, and I think everybody accepts that. And I think for anyone to try to pretend that we don't have a climate crisis, I think that they're living in another universe. That is the issue that we need to confront. So I think we're in a good space. I think that there is an acknowledgement. And look, the thing with climate change, it doesn't matter, you can be in your little boat in the corner of somewhere, but it's a global crisis. Eventually it will get you. So yes, if we look at the African continent, our global contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is very low.
What percentage is it? Do we have a number?
Maybe 2-3%. And 50% of that is South Africa. Right? So for many countries, they are either contributing so little, or they're actually not contributing anything. So, but doesn't matter. Climate change will affect you, and you will feel the effects of climate change, and therefore you need to be part of the solution. So you can't say, well, in my corner of the wood, it's always been hot, so what difference does another degree make? Africa has always been hot. You will be impacted. The forests will be impacted. The velocity of the climate change, will depend the extent of the damage. Those species that can migrate will migrate. Those that can't, will be impacted. So some of the species that we know today in certain locations may not be there in times to come. Some of the forests that are growing in certain places, they may not be there as a result because they can't move.
I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? That it's not perceptible. It's gradual, and it doesn't scream and shout at you that I'm here. You need to do something. for this to stop. And the interest,
but the one thing, Trevor, just
sure, absolutely,
you are so right, and that's why most of us think that this is someone else's problem. It's not my problem. But the issue is the historical emissions are the ones that are impacting us, and they stay there.
Yeah.
So whatever we emit today is going to be there, and it's going to affect it. But the one thing that is happening now is that the frequency and the severity of extreme weather events, that is going to increase. And that is one indication, that things are not, the way
we are already experiencing that,
exactly.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And that is happening in our lives, and we can see, and we'll get to a point where we all know someone that has been impacted by this issue. So if you look at Cyclone Idai and the devastation in the Chimanimani area, and now we had Batsirai and Cyclone Ana, people now begin to relate to this, and they can see, what is happening. So those things are likely to, we like to
spare us into some form of action.
Exactly, because the severity will increase, the frequency will increase. Well, the issue is that when we're talking about the role of forests, it's a low-hanging fruit, but forests on their own cannot address the climate crisis. Because if you look at where are the big emissions coming from, transport sector is a big so you've got to, so whilst you look at low-hanging fruit like the forest, it might buy you some time, you've got to address the other sectors that are major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. So the transport sector is a major one, the energy sector, so the whole debate around fossil fuels, right? And of course, when you get into that, so if you look at South Africa, why is South Africa contributing to 50% of Africa's emissions? It's a huge, massive generation of whatever, 47,000 megawatts of electricity from coal. And so then the debate is, how do you transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy? And the whole threat of how do you make that transition a just transition? Because they are jobs, they're people's lives. So, it's not just transitioning the energy, but you've got to be looking at people's livelihoods, their jobs. And how do you make that transition a just one? So that, you don't end up with all these stranded assets, jobs lost, and, you go away. So I think that is, it's a contentious issue. And so what does it mean for the continent in order to transition?
Yeah.
So if you look at us in Zimbabwe. And Hwange generation plant, we're not contributing a lot, but we need to start to be looking. Because on the other hand, you cannot develop the African continent relying on biomass energy. No country can, or a region, a continent can develop on traditional biomass energy. You've got to modernize. You've got to transition to modern, clean, affordable, electricity.
Right.
And so when you compare Africa to, let's say, Latin America or Southeast Asia, we have a disproportionately high dependence on biomass energy. So there has to be a transition to modern energy. And so the question is, how do we take advantage of our renewable sources of energy? And the availability of that renewable energy depends on the country context. So we don't have a lot of wind. So, you see some windmills, but if you try to map wind regimes over the country, there are not many places where you can run windmills.
That's interesting.
So, but we've got solar. So How do we look at solar? If you look at Kenya, they have geothermal as well. So they're harnessing hot water from under the ground in order to drive, turbines and things like that. So we have to look at what makes the best sense for each country in terms of an energy transition. But we do need modern energy. We need to develop, because we have a growing population. The young people have an expectation. They are looking for opportunities. How do we provide? How do we ensure that the continent develops? But also, more importantly, how do we ensure that that development is sustainable and that we do that in a responsible way?
Talking of Zimbabwe's environment, I know you've dealt with the issues of biodiversity in Zimbabwe and looked at how best to benefit from our environmental situation. Hey, what's the right way of that transition? Because we've got Wange, like you said, that coal that maybe some people might say we haven't even started mining it. Should we be moving away from that? What position should we be taking on that?
I think it needs to be a gradual process. I think we need to look at what are the energy mixes. So, move into an energy mix.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm involved in a project with Manicaland Bioenergy. We are looking at the Eastern Highlands, where the waste from those plantations at the sawmills is burnt at 24/7. And so we are saying, you're burning this waste 24/7 at a cost. Why can't we will put a value on that waste. We will pay you for that waste. So we create a new revenue stream for you, and we will now generate electricity from what you're just burning. So, that's a possibility. The sugar people have been doing that for some time with their bagasse. So they crush the sugar cane and they're left all that stuff. So they've been doing that, and they've been generating, energy for local consumption. So there might be those possibilities. So I think a mix, and as you develop and as technology becomes cheaper, you then begin to start to reduce. And this is where this just transition. You can't just today, say, we stop.
Decouple.
We're stopping coal. But how do we gradually do that, and how do we buy into that agenda?
Talk to me about the Manicaland project, the biodiversity project. At what stage is it right now? Is it a functioning project, or you're still looking at feasibility?
No, we've done all the studies. And we have a generation license, and we are now finalizing the negotiations with ZETDC, the generation company of ZESA, for a power purchase agreement. It's a very, very protracted process. But but we've concluded the negotiations for the power purchase agreement. So we've agreed on the price for kilowatt hour. And the next thing is the funding, because funders want to see, do you have a generation license? Do you have a power purchase agreement? Because they don't want to fund a project that won't be able to sell electricity. So that's what we are looking at. So
I wish you the best with that
thanks.
project.
So maybe 2 years we should be generating some electricity.
Do you see the possibility of other projects like that? Not necessarily biodiversity in terms of converting waste into energy. Other similar projects that could come across the country.
I think solar has the biggest potential. So even if you look at companies like Econet, they run these huge data centers across the country, and by and large, those data centers are run by solar. So there's a lot of that happening at the moment, a lot of standalone generation, and again, a mix between renewable solar and traditional supply from ZESA. But I think that there is a lot of potential, and it looks like solar still represents the greatest potential for Zimbabwe.
For me, I get the discomfort, when you use the word protracted, because one would have thought that this is urgent, this is important, this is where we ought to be going. I know it's not, the call is not yours, but you would think that policymakers understand the importance of this and they fully embrace this. And for somebody like you coming up with an idea like this would be got to top floor already.
I think there are discussions that are taking place around these issues. After all, we are part of we are signatories to these conventions. We are signatories to the UN Climate Change Convention and the Paris Agreement. And we are signatories to the Biodiversity Convention. So we are part of these processes. We are fully engaged in the, in the negotiations. But, when you get back home, it's always not so simple. Huh? It's more complicated. Legislation has to be modified, and, you've got to go through all those processes. So you might agree when you're in Paris.
Yeah.
When you come back home, you've got to now negotiate with, all the other sectors about how to actually make this happen on the ground.
Yemi, you are a researcher. You've interfaced with policy. I would really love us right now to take a brief moment, a few minutes or so, just to go into some of the books that you've written. You've written a number of books. You've published, you've 70 publications.
Yeah, but I haven't written lots of books. So
let's start with securing the resilience and sustainability of people and woodlands. You contributed to that. What's the thinking there?
So this book is around the Miombo woodlands. The Miombo woodlands are found in 7 countries. So Angola, DRC, Zambia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Tanzania.
Why Miombo woodlands? The name?
That's a good question. It might have its origins in Zambia.
Okay.
But it's a dry forest type. Some people don't call it, some say it's not a forest, it's a woodland.
Okay.
That's the other thing. But when you look at its extent, it's just under 3 million hectares, 3 million square kilometers of woodland. So you can imagine the number of people that are dependent on this woodland for their livelihoods. Some of the protected areas, national parks, are in Miombo, but not all. Not all of them are in the Miombo.
Right.
And so so there have been some books written, but we felt that, look, too often we as foresters, as environmentalists, we talk to ourselves. We're actually not communicating with the people.
Interesting.
And that why do we expect that people can actually think that this is something important if we're not engaging with them? And this is why we made this link between this and people, that we needed to reach out and we needed to make a case for these woodlands, and that we needed to have a different type of conversation. And one of the things we did in this book was, besides just doing the usual ecological descriptions of these things and where they are and so on, is that we introduced a scenarios chapter. What if, if this happened, what would happen? So, supposing people stopped smoking in the world,
how we wish.
We would save our forests, you know what I mean? So we tried to bring in some scenarios, and we started trying to engage with politicians. So, for example, the foreword of the book is by the former president of Mozambique, Chissano. And what was amazing is that in our conversation with him, soon as we start, he immediately went to his childhood days, growing up, his relationship with the forest. You could, relate to medicines and all those kinds.
And he's a cattle farmer, so.
So I mean, he was
a rancher. Sorry, he's a rancher.
We didn't need to, he could relate to why this is important and why we need to actually engage and communicate, more broadly.
That's interesting, because you are engaging, being relevant. That way, maybe there's going to be traction, isn't it, on something that's hugely important?
Interesting, we even approached Strive Masiwa's foundation here in Zimbabwe. And we wanted them to be part and parcel of this project. And that once the book was published, we wanted them to support like the launch and really to try and popularize, the book. But it was, I think at the time that we were talking, we published this in 2020, I think,
the whole...
Yeah, they weren't, quite there, so it didn't happen. But we thought, we should bring in people like Strive into that space as well.
Interesting. Then the other one that caught my attention, the fuel wood trap. a study of the SADC region. Just give me the highlights of that, the silent points. What issues are we trying to raise there?
So the debate...
Fuel wood trap. That headline just caught me.
Yeah, part of it is that we're caught in this endless thing, our dependence on biomass. And we then try to distinguish between woody biomass, the trees, versus non-woody biomass, other things that we use, like dung. So in parts, of Africa, people dry dung, then they use the dry dung as fuel. Some use mashanga or maguri, maize cobs and things, in order to cook with. And so we went around SADC to try and understand these different contexts. And this issue of, does fuel wood cause deforestation? And really the response is not really. It causes forest degradation. But if you look
That's interesting.
But if you look at the commercialization, when you look at tobacco, it's at a different level, obviously. And so out of that work of the fuel trap, we tried, and we were trying to understand all these discussions about fuel wood efficient stoves, how to design fuel efficient stoves. And so the whole movement around designing different kinds of stoves that you can use, extend the energy, the calorific energy of your biomass. And even here we came up with a stove that we call the Tsotso stove. We designed the Tsotso stove with the private sector, and we tried to push that.
It's not happening. Maybe its time is not come.
And because what we found is that people are using tsotso to cook. And so we designed a tsotso stove that you don't need to go and cut a tree. You just pick up twigs that fall from trees and maize cobs, and you feed into that, and you have energy to boil water.
Are we anywhere close to being freed from this trap?
No. And this is why I say when we compare with other regions, we remain disproportionately highly dependent on biomass.
Another publication that caught my attention that you're involved in is Agriculture, Africa's Double-Edged Sword.
Yeah, we need food, unfortunately, or fortunately. And food has to be produced. And often, to produce food, you need land. So, like you were saying, land is finite, but water as well. So in some cases, it's rain-fed agriculture, and in some cases, it's irrigation. And when you look at expansion in population, as the population grows, of course, we need to feed more mouths. And where is that food going to come? So inevitably, you've got to expand land. So the debate is between extensification as you continue, or you find ways of producing more food
using smaller pieces of land, intensive.
Exactly. So that's the whole issue, is that how do we design a food production system? And remember, the food production system is not just about the growing. It's about the preparation of the land. Where do you get the land? How do you prepare? The energy that is used to do that. The pollution, whether using tractors, whatever, and using diesel. And then the production process and the insecticides and the pollution that comes out of that. The processing, the storage, the manufacturing. And all those, so if you look at the entire value chain of the food production system, each one has impacts, on the environment. So we're looking at how do we ensure that all these steps along the value chain can be efficient, more efficient, use less resources, use less energy.
Are we winning there?
At least we're talking about these issues. Okay. And I think that, you will find examples. And that I think sometimes what we need to do is we need to find those cases of where things are working, and then how do we scale those, more widely, those lessons and those experiences.
Things that work.
Exactly, and we need to do that across, where there's climate change. How are people coping at the local level with climate change? What are the lessons that we can learn from that? How do we scale those, in the country and across?
You have tremendous experience, Yemi. on the continent and all across the world. And I'll just, highlight a few. We've already spoken about you being involved with the Manicaland Bioenergy Company, which you started in 2019. Fascinating that you were a member of the ANC COSATU Alliance. You provided advice in terms of their policy, the ANC policy towards issues of environment. Interesting experience. Involved with the African Wildlife Foundation for Zimbabwe biodiversity economy. The study is still running, or it ended in 2021. Regional Director, Southern Africa for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Deputy Director, Center for International Forestry. You worked with the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And the question that I have for you there is, having this view of the continent, the subcontinent, the sub-region, what are the major challenges that we're facing in this space? And are we anywhere close to being able to unlock the solutions to what your research, what your work experience, what you've encountered in this space could help unlock?
Trevor, my sense is that we've made progress. But these issues, the nature of these issues, like you're saying, if you talk about climate change, they're not tangible, they're not immediate. They're not things that I experience in the morning, when I wake up. Or if there's a biodiversity crisis that, is going to, affect me. So I think that there's a lot of good work. There are a lot of dedicated and committed people. I think one of the challenges that we face is having an African, investing more in African thought leadership, investing more in African institutions that provide the leadership, that look at these issues from the African perspective. Yes, we're part of this global problem, but what does it mean for Africa? Mm-hmm. And so that as we engage as equals, and that we are able to say, no, these issues are not a priority. Mm. So that we don't follow money.
Because we understand our context.
Exactly. And we're not following money. We're not doing things because there's money, and so we do them. And that even when there's money, and that money is made available for things that don't make sense, we say, look, we don't want this money because this doesn't make sense. It's not a priority for us. These are the issues that we would like to address. And I think sometimes we undervalue the African
intellectual contribution.
Exactly. So we're not investing enough in those institutions, and I think that is a major issue.
You raise an important issue there, Yemi, which is, roughly put, is to what extent can we push against international NGOs fostering their agendas on us?
Yes, and I think that sometimes, this issue about whether we need aid or not, sometimes we need to talk about the quality of that assistance and the terms at which, that assistance is given. But if we are coming from a position of weakness, then it's very difficult for us to negotiate those terms and to be able with confidence to say no, because we understand those issues. But I think that getting to your point of international NGOs, I think that the conservation footprint on this continent is huge.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And sometimes I think that, we really need to recalibrate that, and we need to bring
our
own institutions. And sometimes, the funders feel more confident and comfortable to put money in these international NGOs than
our own NGOs.
Than ours. But then we need to think more innovatively and more imaginatively to say, okay, it's fine. how do we also mobilize our own resources, you know, domestic, at local jurisdictions? And yeah, you know, I've been part of that industry, and you know, the issue is, yes, we get used to a certain lifestyle and, you know, and comfort, but sometimes I think we need to, as leaders, we need to accept that, look, for the sake of this continent, this is what we believe. And so we are going to take less in order to ensure that this continent delivers meaningfully to its people, that we address the issues of poverty, because we understand this context and so on. And so I think that's something that we need to look at. How can we mobilize? And, you know, maybe, so, you know, we don't have a very strong culture of giving. You know, if I come to you and I say, can you give me, you know, $100?
Philanthropy?
Yeah, it's not, you know, our philanthropy is expressed differently. You know, we support, you know, our families and so on. That's how we express that. And we support our brothers' kids to go to school and, you know, those kinds of issues. That's how we do it. But to put money to conservation. Yeah? And in other countries, the private sector philanthropy is well advanced because the legislation. So you get Kellogg Foundation, you know, Rockefeller Foundation and Ford Foundation.
It's a culture.
Right, those things. You know, I was looking at figures. The giving of Chicago alone is billions. You know, and the people are giving to all kinds of activities, from abuse of animals to abuse of people, and, you know, all kinds of things that they think are important. And why can't we get small amounts? Can you imagine if we had, if 10 million Zimbabweans each gave $1?
Right. That would make a difference, wouldn't it?
As Nyaradzo, we strive to continuously bring convenience to our clients. Nyaradzo Group is proud to introduce Sawi, a new virtual chatbot assistant on WhatsApp. With Sawi, you are now able to interact with us from the comfort of your home and can be assisted anytime via WhatsApp. With life assurance products, diaspora products, applying and assessing your policy, payment platforms, claims information, and any other queries concerning payments, policy information, or products and services. Simply WhatsApp Sawi on +263 712 992892 or register and start interacting and receiving notifications from Sawi on WhatsApp. Now, join in and experience a new level of convenience 24 hours a day with Sawi.
Yemi, I'm always fascinated by our journeys to who we become. Look at you now, the expertise that you have. But where did all this start, Yemi? Let's talk now about Yemi. Where were you born, Yemi? And where were you raised?
Yeah, I had no vision, you know. When you go for any interviews, we'll ask you, what is your vision? I had no grand plan and so on. And I think by and large, I ended up where I am because of accidents of history. I'm born in Makoni. I left this country, very interestingly, I crossed into Zambia at Kariba. And I handed in my ID. You were allowed to walk onto the wall. And we had arranged with some comrades that met me at the halfway point. And I just went in between them and we walked into Zambia. They put me in a car. The border, both on the Zambian and the Zimbabwean side, the borders are quite a distance from the actual dam. And then we drove and we got to the border post, the Zambian border post. They went in and stamped the passports. I was in the boot. And they...
in the boot?
In the boot. They came back, they jumped into the car. Then you come to the boom, the customs boom.
Yeah.
So they had brought a picnic basket, so they gave the customs guys some, stuff and newspapers. They don't get newspapers. And then we drove through a few kilometers and I came out. And I guess my ambition, as many young people, was, to join the
liberation
struggle and liberate this country. And, very quickly, Trevor, I kind of figured this wasn't my calling, that I could contribute, in other ways. So I decided to go back to school. So went back to school.
Where did you go back to school?
So I went to University of Zambia.
Okay.
I graduated. And then, what do? You in this country, you came in, you kind of have refugee status. And at that time we had British passports valid for 6 months. Well, not British passports, we were called British citizens, subjects. So one of my professors, undergraduate, said, let me give you some names, write to people in the United States. So I wrote to people, and there's one man that's kept communicating with me. So finally, he asked me what I want to do. I said, you know what? I want to study wildlife management, because I was doing a lot of research during the holidays in the national parks in Zambia. So I thought, this is it. This is my calling. This man, turns out he's a lecturer in the forestry department in Illinois, in the United States. He said, Yemi, I think you should study forestry. So I said, why not? So I went to the United States. I had never studied forestry. I had to do undergraduate work in forestry before I could do a master's degree in forestry, and then on to a PhD in Moscow, Idaho. That's how I ended up. There was no grand plan. And so I ended up in forestry really because of the circumstances. And I think that before independence, studying was a way. You finish one degree, what do? You do another degree and another degree. And so, I ended up with a PhD in forest resource management at the University of Idaho. And I could always say, when I came back to Zimbabwe, people used to ask me, where did you study? And I say, Moscow. And it sounded so revolutionary. But this was Moscow in the United States.
United States.
Yeah, very small place.
Fascinating, isn't it? I mean, you say you had no vision or whatever, but here you are, me talking to you, and you're perhaps one of Africa's leading experts when it comes to forestry and the environment. And this is something that you went into not because you calculated, but you found yourself doing it.
But we know what was interesting, as we would meet with other colleagues, Zimbabweans, we all had these aspirations. I said, I want to be the head of forestry. But
when did you start having those ideas?
As
I
was,
want to be the head of forestry.
As we were studying, so we had this sense that, we want to go back to the country, to assume leadership. So for example, when I finished my first degree, the party said, go and study piloting in Ethiopia. And I was like, no.
And the party is ZANU-PF.
ZANU-PF.
Yeah.
So they would
have just ZANU at that time.
Yeah. So they have programs.
Yeah.
So these programs, they would then, and it was very interesting, when you look at the way they were organized, because they realized that the struggle was not just about the armed struggle, but that when you get the country, what are you going to do with it? You need people with skills, to do different things. So they had these different programs where they would channel people. So they said, we need pilots, go to Ethiopia. I said, no. I just, piloting didn't, And so I said, I know I'm going to do forestry. And forestry was a priority. I mean, law wasn't a priority. History wasn't a priority. So forestry was. And then I said, I want to come back and, and be the head of forestry. So we come back at independence. Forestry was a white-run, organization. There were no black professionals, unless you were, lower down, semi-skilled and unskilled kind of work. So there was a major transformation to actually take place in this country to transform the Forestry Commission.
And you're well positioned.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I came back, I joined the Forestry Commission. The government then brought in a Canadian expatriate, and I was asked to understudy. I understudied, and then I took over the role, and then transformed, not just in terms of the business model and the branding, but also what this institution means at the national level, and how to give Zimbabweans a stake in this organization, you know, sending people, you know, to study and come back, and giving them, you know, that we believe in you, and giving them positions that, you know, we never imagined that we could do, you know, running sawmills, designing sawmills, you know, people had that capacity and they needed, you know, the space to do that. And so that to me was really, really very rewarding, you know, transformation. Yeah.
Well done. And you were, because of that, in 1993, awarded with the Queen's Award for Forestry. And you and I were laughing before we went live that this is almost like a Nobel Peace Prize for forestry. Talk to me about what that recognition meant for you.
I think for me, it's an affirmation of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. Really repositioning forestry in this country. But also in that repositioning, giving you know, blacks a sense of this, you know, this is something that we can contribute to, and transforming that into an organization that is truly national, you know. And this is not to mean that we didn't have white people working within the Forestry Commission, but it had to reflect the demographic of, you know, of this country. But repositioning forestry in terms of what is forestry, and what does it mean in terms of within the context of national development and those kinds of issues. And for me, the award was an affirmation of the work that we were doing here. Sure, I got the award, but, you know, working with a whole lot of other people.
Representing other people, yeah.
Got the award is really an affirmation that the work that we're doing was truly transformative. It was meaningful, and it was making a significant difference and a contribution to the development of this country, and that it had implications for the Commonwealth. That was, you know, the really important overrider, that it's a contribution to forestry at the national level with implications for the Commonwealth.
And clearly, a lot of people that I talk to on this show, Yemi, have failed. It's not all of us who are vulnerable enough to share our failures. Talk to me, if you may, about the biggest lessons that you've learned from your failures, if you're at liberty to share what that failure was.
Absolutely. I think we need to be able to share failure. I have quite a few, but the one that I think, you know, I had a mentor that worked with in my leadership role. And this is somebody I would call and bounce off ideas now and again. So he calls me one day and says, look, Yemi, I'm going to arrange half-a-day session with the top CEOs in South Africa. To dedicate half a day for you. I'll pull them together, exactly, 7 of them. One was the CEO of Tetra Pak and so on. So he does that. And so the whole idea is, how can you mobilize private sector support for conservation, environment, and these kinds of issues, and get the private sector into that space. So I prepare solidly for 2 weeks, get to Joburg, I'm pumped up, I make a presentation, I speak, then I get to the end and I stop, and there's silence. Dead silence. And so, you know, then one guy says, you know, Yemi, we have no idea what you do. We can tell you're passionate. And you know, I wished the floor could
open up and swallow you up.
Basically, I was talking to myself. I was talking to the converted. And I completely was not able to identify the audience and how to communicate. So, yes, I was saying the right things and, well, you know, using the right terms. These were private sector people working at the highest level. They had no idea what all this stuff is. All they could say is that this person is passionate.
Articulate.
But we have no idea what you do. So, you know, it was very, very deflating to feel that you've prepared so much and, you know, and nobody
understood and identified.
And therefore, the objective of trying to get them interested in the work that we do and getting them to put resources is missed. But the other one is, Trevor, with a colleague, we decided to set up a green venture capital fund. I quit my job at the Forestry Commission. And I remember Minister Murerwa walking with me and trying to convince me, and I was like, Minister, I've done
Change your mind.
I've done my share. So anyway, I invest my savings with this colleague, and we set up this green venture, really about ethical investments. And that if you're going to, for example, build a tourist lodge, solar energy and, responsible ways of disposal of waste and a preference given to female entrepreneurs and those kinds of issues. So we do a roadshow to the United States, we do a roadshow to...
You're pumped up?
Exactly, to Europe. Couldn't get anyone
to support the idea.
Everyone kept saying, if someone else is the first to invest, we will come. So I ran out of money. 6 months later.
What did that teach you, Yemi?
Firstly, I think the first lesson is maybe we should have invested our money into the fund.
You should have been the first to...
Exactly. We should have been the first to put the money and say, we have put, 300,000 or $1 million, or we've put our savings, which shows that you have skin in the game. But, we didn't. And basically we used those resources over the 6 months to do the roadshow and, those kinds of things. So that was the lesson.
Tell me, what would you say to a 21-year-old Yemi, particularly on the issues of environment? What would you say? What advice would you give to a 21-year-old Yemi about life and the environmental issues?
I think young people today are more conscious of the environment. It's very interesting when you have conversations with young people. I think they're more conscious of the environment. They see things that are not working. But more importantly, they have a sense of social responsibility, that at the local jurisdiction, that they can also show leadership and they can do something in their locality. It doesn't need to be a big thing. But I think also for young people, what is important is that they need to have confidence. And I think it's Arthur Ashe was saying that the key to success, first of all, is confidence. And the key to confidence is preparation. You've got to believe in yourself. You've got to have that confidence that I can do this thing, and then prepare. I think also be inquisitive.
Right.
Ask questions. Because, as they say, if you've never been lost, you've never been anywhere. So if you don't ask questions, you'll never know. So, ask questions. I would say I would encourage young people to get involved in projects, social projects. So you might have a job, or even if you don't yet have a job, get involved in some kind of social projects. And whether it's as simple as cleaning, volunteer type of work. Because I think what it does, it gives you social grounding. It gives you a sense of belonging in terms of the issues around you, and you're able to to provide some kind of leadership.
Great advice.
So that would be
great advice. Great advice. Yemi, you are a researcher, you are an author, and we love books on this show. Please share with us at least three books, Yemi, that you've read that have had a huge impact on you. What would those books be?
Yeah, Trevor, I struggle with this issue because, most of the time we're reading all this serious stuff. And so when I have the opportunity to read, I'm also looking to read different kinds of things. So I thought I could come here and talk about The Audacity of Hope by Barack Obama, And I thought, no, I want to talk about things that are completely different.
Sure.
So this is the first book. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've...
Ferdinand Houseboy.
The Houseboy.
No, I haven't.
So this book is it's a very sad book. It's funny, sad, and also tragic. It's set in colonial Cameroon. And it's based on diary. This houseboy sees what white people do. They write things in diaries. So he buys these notebooks, exercise books, we call them here. And he starts to do what they do. He writes things. So when he dies, somebody finds this, and that's what the story is. But Tunde is the main person. He escapes brutality at home. And his father was pretty physical with him, and he goes to work for a priest, missionary, as his escape. But he gets to the priest and is humiliated and brutalized by the priest. The priest then dies in an accident. And he had been introduced to, local commandant, sort of police commandant, the French, police, and he starts to work. His aspiration desires to become like the French, aspire to this world of the Europeans, what he aspires. And so in his relationship with this couple, is about that. And he loses his sense of identity in the process. And he then, the wife of the commandant, his madam, has affairs with different people. And as the houseboy, he knows all this thing and he
writes it all down.
He documents everything. But anyway, down the road, I think the system becomes uncomfortable with this houseboy who's aspiring, to be French. And so that leads to his downfall. And he's then arrested. And one of his co-workers in this house gets away with a box of money and some clothes, and they say he's part of it and he knows it. So eventually they arrest him. He's beaten up quite severely. He's in hospital. And he escapes. Early hours of, they suspect that he has a broken rib which has punctured maybe his lung. He then escapes from Cameroon into, it was then called Spanish Guinea, Equatorial Guinea. And he goes there. That's where he dies as a result of his injuries. And he leaves behind his exercise books, which are found. And it's the story. But really, losing his sense of identity, where he belongs, aspiring to be
something else,
something into another world, and becoming complacent that he has arrived, and is therefore not able to anticipate when the system turns against him, and he's brutalized by the system, and he ends up, dying. So he escapes from brutality, from his home, and goes into the white world through the priest, and he ends up dying at the hands of brutality. So that is what
Houseboy is all about.
Yeah.
And the next book?
The next book, this...
Read it, Clavi.
Right. This is a book about Kwezi, and I think most people will know Kwezi as the woman that accused Jacob Zuma
of rape.
And she, and then the case goes to trial. And you know the whole story about that Zuma had unprotected sex with her and so on and so on. But the issue about this book is broader, and I think what it does is that it exposes the struggles of women, in this world. Kwezi grows up within the liberation struggle in Eswatini, Swaziland at that time. Her father actually died in Zimbabwe.
I didn't know.
Yeah, he died in a car accident in Zimbabwe. But she grows up, by the age of 13, she'd been raped 3 times by adults, by people that are part of
the liberation struggle.
Part of the liberation struggle. But so the story is more about, first of all, the justice system, how it's stacked against women, but also more importantly, how most of us are complacent. That we see this as normal and we're not able to stand up, we're not able to call each other out. And I myself have been guilty of that. That, you know, my wife will come home and tell me, can you imagine this man
did this,
wants me to sleep with him in order to get a job, you know, and so on. And I don't
do anything.
I don't take it seriously that something needs to be done. And that how we have become complacent and how we are normalizing what is actually the abnormal. So that to me is the power thing. It's not so much about the trial and the details of the rape and so on, but her journey, young woman being raped by people that were close to her, people that were in the liberation struggle.
Father figures too.
Exactly. And the role of women, and if you recall at her trial, the people that were demonstrating against her
were women.
The Women's League, the ANC Women's League. And so how also women sometimes, when other women come to them for support, they tell them, well, you know, you have to play the game if you want to, you know, stay in the system. So that's the power of that.
Fantastic. And then this one, okay.
This book is a strange book, Dead Aid, by Dambisa Moyo. She's Zambian, but it's controversial in the sense that some people feel that the way this book is presented and the arguments, they don't hold. Others feel that this is something that needed to be said and that she put these issues, you know, on the table.
Succinctly too.
And so the question is, why is it, I can't remember when she wrote this book, so it's probably about 14 years ago. Why is it the issues that she raised 14 years ago are still relevant today? And what are we doing to try and change those issues? And I think some of the earlier points that we're talking about, how do we change the narrative? How do we support African institutions? How do we mobilize resources domestically so that we have ownership and we take charge? And I think that, and how we can negotiate differently. So perhaps not that aid itself is bad, but it's also how we are receiving that aid and how we are negotiating. And that perhaps we need to negotiate differently and argue differently. And maybe some of the aid we shouldn't take. So I thought that is, I found it pertinent and interesting to some of the conversations that we...
Beautiful. I'm grateful, and I'm sure our viewers out there are going to be grateful for the selection of books. I must say, you are the first person that has recommended books written by Africans only. So thank you so much, Yemi. You inspire me. You represent a generation that's done so much for our country, but much more importantly, the work that you did and continue to do within the environment and forestry. I mean, it's an issue that we might not be giving full recognition right now, but like you said, we're beginning to feel the effects of not taking good care of our environment. So thank you so much, Yemi. I know you're still very young, lots to do. We wish you nothing but the very best in your future endeavors, Yemi.
No, thank you so much, Trevor, and I really appreciate you inviting me. And I think for an excellent conversation, exploring different aspects and dimensions of some of the challenges of this continent from the window of biodiversity and environment.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you so much. You remain there. Allow me to address myself now to our viewers who are all over the world. We appreciate your support. Remember, In Conversation with Trevor is a weekly show. We are out every Monday on YouTube at 7 a.m. Central African Time. To ensure that you don't miss out on any of these quality conversations like this conversation I've had with Yemi right now, please click on this red button and subscribe. If you subscribe, you'll get an alert every Monday when we are out, a notification that tells you that we are out for one of these quality conversations. We see all your comments. We see your recommendations as to who should be on the show. The team reads all those comments. Keep on commenting and keep on sharing. Until next time, cheers to you all.